Welcome back. Now, even with the high cost of living and upcoming festive season, a whopping 68% of South Africans are optimistic about their household finances for the coming year, and this according to TransUnion's third quarter Consumer Pulse study. Ayesha Hatea, Director of Research and Consulting at TransUnion, joins us with more detail on the findings of the study and what it reveals about your personal finances. Ayesha, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. It's been really interesting to see how, different stakeholders, whether it's business, whether it's consumers themselves, that are pretty optimistic about the state of their finances. Just a few minutes ago, I was chatting to an analyst who was quite upbeat about retail stocks on the back of, the optimism we are seeing when it comes to consumers. And let's start there. What's been driving this optimism? I mean, you look at Q1, Q2, when it comes to that consumer study, Pulse study, and it's also still been pretty upbeat. Are we seeing this on the back of consumers genuinely being in a better state, or are consumers just a bit more financially savvy?
So it's a fascinating mix of resilience and adaptation. And it's exactly to your point. We see that consumers are more proactive, they're more confident in their finances. If we look at some of the questions that we address in the study, more consumers are looking at their credit report as an example, understanding what their budget looks like, what their wallet looks like. And so it's that sense of confidence that's driving this optimism. And we also find that when consumers are optimistic, they think about how are they spending, where are they spending, how are they taking on more credit. And to your point, going into the retailers and spending a little bit extra. So it's definitely a strong sentiment that is rooted in some of the confidence they experience. I think also, like, just off the bat, the lights are on, the lights are staying on in the last couple of months here in South Africa. And so that's also contributing to the optimism that our consumers are feeling.
And just on sentiment, Ayesha, what are you picking up from consumers now? Looking at the broader environment, we've seen a few public sector and private sector wage deals being signed. We've also heard of a number of companies, announcing job losses as well. How are consumers balancing that mixed picture when it comes to sentiment, when it comes to spending?
Yes, I mean, in the survey, we do ask them, in terms of the challenges they experience, how do they plan on dealing with it, and what are the things they plan on doing? Quite a few of our consumers tell us, they are looking for alternative income streams. They are trying to pay their debt down as fast as possible, and also cutting down on discretionary spend. So again, there's that resilience, there's that confidence and that proactivity around adjusting their budgets and their spending.
And when you talk about looking for additional income streams, it makes me think of the hustle culture, the gig economy that we are seeing growing in the country, and that really being targeted to millennials as well as Gen Zs, right? And talking about those particular generations, what we've seen from them as well is a pick up in how they, buy appliances, furniture, products online with the growth of buy now, pay later. Talk to me about the trends we're seeing there.
So the Gen Zs and the millennials, they are leading the adoption of buy now services. About 55% in Gen Z space and 59% of the millennials have actually used these services in the last 12 months. So it does reflect both an opportunity as well as a risk. So younger consumers, they value the flexibility, they value the convenience, but it's crucial that they use these tools responsibly to avoid overextending themselves. So with this inclusion and with this drive, financial education also becomes quite important, specifically for these younger generations as they enter the market and they become more savvy around these products.
And I must admit, I'm one of those millennials that does use the BNPL products, or rather, I also prefer it over, your traditional credit card, just because there isn't interest charged, right? But on a regulatory front, it seems like there's been increased calls, Ayesha, around BNPL needing regulation, especially with rising debt pressures. How risky is the unregulated credit option in this environment? I mean, we do talk about, rising cost of living.
Yeah. So look, at the end of the day, like everything, it has pros and it has cons. And so as much as it's a great service, like you said, it's interest free, and consumers are able to leverage that, to extend their affordability, to extend their liquidity. So it is great. I guess from a liquidity perspective, it's sort of a blind spot for the broader credit economy. It's not taken into account when we're looking at things as affordability and affordability calculations, as most other credit agreement
Yeah.
comes into play. But then it goes back to that financial education piece. So it's really important for then the consumer to understand their wallet, understand their repayment, manage their budgets, and make provision for those things, because it's not going to happen through regulation. And so, like I said, there's always pros and cons to everything. It's really important, again, how the consumer uses it and how they're able to leverage it without putting themselves in a disadvantage by overextending. So it becomes quite important, that education piece.
Yeah, and just sticking with credit, an interesting thing that stood out for me in the report was that consumers are leaning more to unsecured credit than secured credit. And I thought to myself, that probably signals, consumers not wanting to take on long-term debt. But with that being said, I want to then bring in the issue around the informal lenders. Is that being measured as well in the study?
No. So unfortunately, in terms of the fact that they're not regulated, it's not formally measured in the industry. In the study, we do ask, what type of loans you're going to, and what type of terms you're looking at, and those type of things. And to your point, they are leaning towards short term. They don't particularly tell us, who they're going to.
Okay.
And that's also quite an important point, because ideally, as a consumer, when you go through a regulated institution, that, it is being regulated. You know that your affordability checks are in place, and that it's in line with what you can afford and what you're able to repay. When we go to these informal lenders, there's no such thing, right? So it doesn't actually take your position into account. It doesn't consider your overall wallet, and it becomes quite dangerous in terms of the expectation of repayment.
Yeah.
And so it is important to stick to the regulated lenders. It's safeguarding yourself ultimately at the end of the day, in terms of your wallet, and also safety in terms of those repayment terms.
All right, let's leave it there. Ayesha, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. Now, that was Ayesha Hatea, Director of Research and Consulting at TransUnion.